No, let's talk about Julius Caesar and to understand how he got power and how he was so popular among the people and what happened. We must remember that this period is the first century BC, and there is the crisis of the Roman Republic and the beginning of sole rulership, because after Caesar there would be Augustus, the first emperor of the Roman Empire. But before that, we are talking about a Roman Republic. You should remember that from the very beginning, Republic was born in the 6th century. This is what I'm talking about is not closely connected to Julius Caesar, so this is what we should understand before talking about him. There were two major groups of people: the plebeians, who had no political rights and in centuries finally got political rights through fights, and the patricians, who were originally huge landowners. And as time passed, they became political power. They all had political power, and there was a kind of political contest between the plebeians and the patricians. uh, there was a crisis of the republic that came in the first century BC, and it came because of the huge territories the Roman Empire took. And very soon, a lot of poor people had to move to the cities. They are the plebs, the antique proletariat. And there were some of the plebeians who were really, really rich people, and they became the rulers of the provinces, the new territories. They were those who were the popular party, and of course the patricians, who always had political power and huge lands. They were the senators, they were members of the Senate, so the senatorial order, other named the Optimates. So this political fight was emerged in the Roman Republic in the first century BC. At the same time, there were a lot of revolts of slaves, because from the provinces a lot of slaves came, and the most famous revolt was uh, the revolt of Spartacus, and it was finally put down by two very important uh, generals, military leaders. This is the name Crassus and Pompey. Both of them had huge armies because in the first century BC, the generals, the military leaders who did the most conquests, had great power, even political power, and they brought their armies back to Italy to put down the revolt of Spartacus. And right after this revolt, of course, there was the rise of generals Pompey and Crassus, who were actually, both of them, Pompey and Crassus, were rivals. And it was a young person, Julius Caesar, who came from a very, very rich family. He was a very good politician. He made a lot of money in different provinces. And in 60 BC, this is what we should remember about Caesar, he made a kind of alliance between Pompey and Crassus, and the first triumvirate was born. Triumvirate is the alliance of three men: Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus. Caesar is the youngest. Pompey and Crassus are all very, very good generals, but they hate each other. And Caesar made them understand that that their long-term power is can only be based on their alliance. So the three men allied, and of course the Senate and the generals became rivals. What happened? These three people, the triumvirate, divided the huge empire into three parts. What happened? Crassus went to the east, to Asia Minor. As you see, there are a lot of territories which are not yet provinces. So Crassus was fighting in the east and tried to get more and more territory on present territory of Turkey. What happened to Pompey? Pompey had the biggest army, and actually he stayed in the western part of the empire. He had huge influence in Rome. He spent a lot of time in the Roman Senate, and he made all the senators his allies, his friends, and he also got some money, a lot of income from Hispania province. And what Caesar did as a youngster, he had to prove that he was a capable leader. He was sent to the north, to Gallia. We call it Gaul in English. And he was fighting with the local Gauls and Celtic people. And he finally could defeat the Celtic leader, who is called Vercingetorix. You don't have to remember that. And what happened? Caesar became really popular because he always sent a lot of treasures and good news to Rome, so the Roman people already know his name. The triumvirate was okay until the death of Crassus. Crassus died in a war in the east, and Pompey became the most important general and the ruler of the Roman Senate, and there was Caesar. So actually it was clear that a civil war would come in the triumvirate, when the triumvirate was broken. As you see, this number 49 BC, Pompey ordered the Senate to call Caesar home. Caesar knew that he is ordered home, but he had to leave his army out of Italy. Rubicon, the river Rubicon, the small one, was the official border of Italy, so he had to leave the soldiers out of Italy. Well, actually, he crossed the Rubicon and he said, the die is cast, a kocka el van vetve. So that was when he knew that it was a trap. So he crossed the river with his army, he didn't care about the order of the Senate, and he marched to Rome. Of course, Pompey was frightened because most of his soldiers were not in Italy. So what he did, Pompey moved to Greece. His veterans were in Macedonia and in Achaia provinces, so in present Greece, and he gathered troops. The civil war started. So Caesar followed him, and in the Battle of Pharsalos in 48 BC, Pompey was defeated. Pompey fled. He fled to Egypt, to Alexandria, and Caesar followed him. This is where Pompey was killed, and this is when Caesar finally put Cleopatra on the throne of Egypt, and they became a couple. They had a son, of course, so they got married. Caesar and Cleopatra became a legendary couple. And of course, Caesar returned to Rome, and when he got back to Rome, the Senate was very frightened. They had been the allies and friends of Pompey, and now Caesar came back. So the Senate was endangered, of course. They promised everything to Caesar. This is when his sole rulership started. What happened? As the next step, he brought a lot of reforms. In this picture, there is the statue made of him, and this is a computer graphic about how he would look like today. Well, he started the accumulation of important offices. So he started collecting offices for himself. And of course, he was elected dictator. Dictator was an old office, a sole ruler of Rome in case of danger. So the Senate was so frightened that he was elected dictator perpetual. This means a dictator forever. And of course, Caesar wanted to get a lot of supporters. So he became really popular when he gave land to his veteran soldiers. and he started the distribution of lands among plebs, among the poorest layer of Rome. They were peasants some years ago, but now they got back their lands and could start uh, cultivation. By this, the shrinking of the proletariat started. So actually, he uh, became really popular among the poor people because they were given lands and even money. The state controlled the distribution of crops as well. So a lot of crops were collected by the state in huge warehouses, and by this they could distribute it when there was a very bad season. So he avoided famines, and his popularity grew again. Panem et circenses. This became the motto of the Roman leaders, later emperors, that if you give bread to the people and entertainment, circus to the people, then they would love you. And yes, Caesar organized gladiator fights and important chariot races and everything, and he was really popular among the masses of poor people. He also raised the number of the senators. It used to be 300, and then it became 600, and now 900. And of course, in the Senate, he put his followers, his friends, his allies. This is how, in the Senate, a lot of supporters he had. He also gave citizenship to a lot of people in the provinces. Not everyone, but many. The province people were a huge amount of people, and they could feel themselves Romans now, because being a Roman was absolutely unachievable for a lot of people. And now they got it. They were Roman citizens. Of course, a lot of popularity grew. He also minted gold and money to strengthen the currency of the empire and reformed the calendar with a leap year. This is when he put a leap year in every fourth year. This is the Julian calendar which we use even today with a little of modification. So these reforms were absolutely for the favor of the lowest layers of the empire. This was the problem. He was finally assassinated. How can it be? So he grasped total power and sole rulership. He was the dictator forever, and by this the traditions of the republic were endangered. So we can say that the senators, the rich patricians who were political leaders before, they felt that they were losing power. So Caesar never gave them anything. So the problem was that the richest layers were losing power and Caesar didn't care about them. So he was super popular among the poor layers. This is also dangerous for the power of the Senate. So there was a problem with Caesar. He didn't care about the rich people. There was a conspiracy formed against him, of course, among the senatorial order, the Senate. So he was stabbed to death in 44 BC. This picture shows that it was not only one person, it was a group of people who killed him with a lot of uh, uh, knives and swords. And there is the famous sentence, et tu, mi fili Brute, and you, my son Brutus. So actually, even Brutus, his stepson, was involved in this assassination. This is why, after the death of Caesar, those who loved him wanted to take revenge, and it was Brutus who had to be killed. So this is the story of Caesar. What you need in érettségi is mostly from the beginning of the first triumvirate. So you should remember the triumvirate, how they divided power and how the triumvirate was broken, and then the reforms of Caesar, and in most of the exercises you get, you must prove that Caesar broke the traditions of the Republic. This is the most important problem with Caesar, and of course his assassination.